The Zionist entity is exploiting the years of crisis in Syria. It is hard to disagree with that statement of Ahmed Qattan, Saudi Arabia's ambassador in Cairo and the kingdom's envoy to the Arab League, in the wake of Netanyahu's assertion that the Golan Heights will always remain a part of Israel. While it is Israel which has carried out attacks within Syrian territory and treats militants fighting there, Netanyahu and his supporters ironically claim Israel must hold on to the Golan for security purposes. The international community, however, has never accepted Israel's illegal annexation of Syrian territory and has made its feeling clear in this regard. In this edition of the debate, we ask, is Israel exploiting the crisis in Syria? Let me now introduce our guests for this edition of the debate. We're joined by the co-director of the International Action Center, Ms. Sarah Flounders, who is joining us live from New York. And we're also joined by the president of the Middle East Research Center, Mr. Richard Hellman, who is joining us live from Washington. Thank you both for joining us. Mr. Hellman, I'll start with you. How do you feel about Netanyahu's contention that the Golan Heights is a red line and must remain a part of Israel?
Well, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel is correct in his statements because historically, anthropologically, archaeologically, historically, and biblically, and in every other way, the Golan Heights is part of historic Israel. It never was part of Syria, and in fact, it only became a part of Syria for a short time when the colonial master Britain, under the Palestine mandate, under the League of Nations, peremptorily, without any approval, carved off the Golan Heights and gave it to the French colonial master of Syria after World War I. And that was, I believe, in exchange for Britain getting a concession, getting some land around Mosul with the rich oil fields there. So this is not, in fact, historic Arab or Syrian land. In fact, it is historically part of Israel. And I've been there often. And in fact, bringing us up to the present day, each time we visit Israel, we go to the Golan Heights and we stand on Mount Bental. And not long ago, in fact, last June, we stood on Mount Bental and we watched the forces of Damascus, of Bashar al-Assad, fighting with al-Nusra and with tanks and artillery fire in Quneitra across the border in Syria. If in fact the Golan Heights were not in Israel's hands, the Golan Heights would be a battlefield between Syria, the regime of Damascus, of Assad, and various forces that are trying to displace him or change the status quo in Syria. And in fact, even a portion of the Sea of Galilee, which is most important to us Christians and to Jews as well, a portion of the shoreline would belong to Syria, and therefore the Syrian forces of all sides would have navigation rights and potentially the rights to naval combat on the Sea of Galilee, historic Lake Kinneret, which is a Jewish patrimony. So this would be totally unacceptable to the Christian and other pilgrims who visit Israel to have the Sea of Galilee in contention and the Golan Heights in contention in the midst of the sad and tragic ongoing Syrian civil war.
Okay, Ms. Flounders, Mr. Hellman there spoke about...
I think Netanyahu, in short...
Mr. Hellman, allow me to come in here and let me get Ms. Flounders in on this conversation as well. Ms. Flounders, I'm wondering what your opinion is on this, because even the United States has come out quite strongly against the statement of Netanyahu. How do you feel about that?
Well, Mr. Hellman is making absolute religious fairy tales in complete violation of international law. Golan is part of Syria legally, and the occupation of Golan by Israel for 49 years now is recognized around the world. So the return of Golan to Syria, that must be kept to the absolute forefront. And Netanyahu's latest claim is really one more conscious provocation, reminding the whole world who is really to blame for the escalation, the division, the war in the entire region, and who has long been absolutely to blame for this escalation. And it's Israel who works hand in glove with U.S. imperialist interests in an attempt to destabilize and divide the countries of the region. So I think President Netanyahu's announcement is a very good reminder to the people of the whole world about war, destabilization, occupation, and it is a good time to assert again that Golan must be returned to Syria. It's a part of a province of Syria, and that has never been changed in the eyes of any country in the world, except Israel, who illegally annexed Golan in 1981 after occupying it in 1967. I don't think we need religious myths and fairy tales to assert that this is an illegal occupation. But we also need to know the role that Israel is playing now in its use of occupied Golan, which is really to militarily aid terrorist forces, aid them militarily, also provide hospital, medical care. All of that happens in Golan. So that is an absolutely criminal role, and a role where in every way Israel is trying to up the ante, and Zionist forces are trying to again assert that only continued war is what they have in their plans for the future.
Mr. Hellman, Ms. Flounders there makes a legitimate point, doesn't she? Because Israel and even Netanyahu have said that they want to keep the Golan because it'll help secure and keep Israel secure. That's what Netanyahu had said. So I'm wondering, as Ms. Flounders there said, A, it's been Israel which has carried out airstrikes in Syria, and B, it's been giving medical treatment to terrorists who are fighting within Syrian borders. So isn't that a bit hypocritical for Israel to claim it wants to keep the Golan to keep itself secure? What about its own role in Syria?
Israel's role in Syria, such as it is extremely limited and very minor. The bloodshed caused by the butcher of Damascus, Bashar al-Assad, in which he has killed on the order of 500,000 of his own citizens, men, women, and children, is a crime, an international crime. He should be prosecuted for genocide, and also anyone who supports him should be similarly prosecuted, including the regime in Tehran and Hezbollah. These are people who are killing Syrians. As I say, 500,000 innocent Syrians have died. Half of the Syrian population, on the order of 15 million souls, have been dispossessed, have been thrown to the winds as refugees, have fled to Lebanon and Jordan and every other nation in the area. And I have seen the sad results of this carnage. I have seen 3 young Syrian freedom fighters with their legs blown away, and we prayed for them to be restored. But that was in the course of their trying to overthrow the dictator of Damascus, Bashar al-Assad, who, like his father, is basically an unelected president for life. And these people, these heroes, I saw them being restored to health. And I also saw the sad and tragic young baby, a little boy with no arms, no legs, and no eyes, lying on his stomach, who was dumped into the hands of the Israelis on the border, and they are restoring this young Syrian boy to life. And I have seen this for in excess of 50 years.
Okay, Mr. Hellman, I do apologize for interrupting your train of thought, but who will hold Israel accountable for its airstrikes in Syria then? You say that you want to hold the Syrian government accountable, but who will hold Israel accountable for its airstrikes? Because you're deflecting the question, Mr. Hellman.
This is really a stunning
specifically about those airstrikes.
This is a stunning admission.
Let me tell you about the airstrikes in Syria, since you asked about the airstrikes in Syria.
How he is actually meeting with terrorists in Israel who are receiving medical care. Let's talk about this.
Bashar al-Assad in 2007. Thank God they did. Otherwise, there would be a nuclear reactor in the hands of one of these terrorist forces at this time.
Again and again, and is bombing Syria now.
Go ahead,
who's
Ms.
the aggressor?
No, they're not. Untrue.
Now, I want to talk about what Mr. Hellman just described about meeting with terrorists who are receiving medical care in Israel, and that shows the role that Israel is playing. We also know, and thank you for reminding the world, about Israel's role in bombing Syria in their development of energy, and who is responsible again and again for trying to stop the development of the entire region. This is why the U.S. arms Israel with billions of dollars, $60 million a day, every day, 60 years. It's gone on and on and on, the aid to Israel. And Israel does this in conjunction with Saudi Arabia and Turkey in the aiding and arming of terrorist reactionary forces in the region, and particularly with ISIS forces, providing both taking part in the bombing and then providing medical relief, supplies, and development to forces operating in Israel. It is a criminal role from start to finish, and Israel is determined to continue that criminal role and to even expand its occupation. So this is the role that Israel has played, whether it is in the bombing and wars in Lebanon. And we should also remember that all of Israel is built on occupied land. Of course, Golan is occupied land of Syria, but all of Israel is built on land occupied by the Palestinian people, and there won't be peace until there is full rights and full sovereignty for the people of Palestine. Now, it's very important to recognize today the Russian and Iranian and Hezbollah assistance, because what are they defending in Syria? They are defending Syrian sovereignty, and that is an issue that the whole world knows is important, because if U.S., Saudi Arabia, Syria, the forces like that can just attack and dismember countries, take them down by arming fanatical forces, then every country is at risk. This is the role that Israel is playing today, and Netanyahu has reminded the world of the occupation of Golan. We should thank him for that. He brings it right into the center of the debate and the discussion again, that Israel is built on occupied land and continues to play an absolutely criminal, illegal role on the world scale.
Okay, Mr. Hellman, I have a very basic question for you, because this is something that's on many people's minds. Is Israel simply taking advantage of the crisis in Syria by saying things like, okay, we're going to keep the Golan forever now because there's a crisis there and we can do as we wish?
No, quite the opposite. In fact, incredibly to me, Israel on a number of occasions has extended itself in peace talks with the government of Syria under the administration of President Clinton and under the administration of both Presidents Bush, 41 and 43. Israel has extended the hand of friendship to Syria and has said, let's make a peace agreement that will be a lasting peace agreement. And they have come very close. But incredibly, and I would say providentially and thankfully, those peace agreements were never concluded, not due to any unwillingness or intransigence on the part of these various Israeli governments, most of which were left-wing labor governments very much wanting to make peace, and sometimes on the part of more conservative Likud governments, but Israel has always wanted to make a peace agreement with regard to the Golan Heights, and many of Israel's military leaders are in the forefront of wanting to make an agreement, but thank God that never went through, or as I say, the terrible carnage perpetrated by Bashar of Damascus with the help of the Russians and the regime in Tehran, Hezbollah and others would be extended to the Golan Heights, and Israel's very heartland would be insecure, and we could not even visit the Sea of Galilee, sacred to Christians and Jews and Muslims as well. We could not have pilgrimages there, and in fact, no one would be able to visit the Golan Heights, just like nobody can peacefully visit Syria today, because sadly, the nations of the world want to oppose Israel among all nations, but they do not want to tell the government of Syria and the other forces in Syria that the time has come to stop the killing, stop the carnage. And it's not Israel's fault. Israel plays no role in the civil war in Syria, and America plays very little role as well. In fact, Iran, Hezbollah, Russia, Turkey, and others play a much bigger role in this terrible carnage, which is unacceptable, which really is genocide by the Damascus regime with the aid, assistance, and abetting of the Iran regime and Hezbollah and others. That's 500,000 souls dead,
ridiculous.
15 million refugees. This ought not be, and it's not any blame of Israel, and it's laughable to say Israel hit
and who is responsible for that?
Reactor.
Israel with
it
the
wasn't
U.S.,
an
with
energy
Saudi
reactor.
Arabia, with Turkey?
It was a nuclear reactor for military purposes on the Euphrates River in 2007, and nobody in the world condemned Israel's air raid because, in fact, they knew that this was a nuclear reactor for military purposes with the aid of North Korea. So Israel has only acted in those regards when, for example, sophisticated arms were being shipped through Syria by Iran to the Hezbollah forces in Lebanon, contrary to the UN Security Council resolutions that ended the 2006 war by Hezbollah against Israel, in which thousands of rockets were fired.
Is this going to go on
that has been totally violated by Hezbollah, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. And when Israel reaches a point where it's against Israel's inherent security, Israel acts through an air raid or whatever it takes. But these are surgical strikes with little or no collateral damage. Israel is the best in the world at avoiding collateral damage.
Okay, Mr. Hellman, let me come in here because I do want to hear from Ms. Flounders as well. I will get back to you for your
let's talk about
Ms. Flounders,
Israel and collateral damage. This is really utterly ridiculous. Let's talk about Israel's collateral damage in Gaza. Let's talk about Israel's collateral damage throughout Lebanon. Let's talk about Israel's collateral damage in Syria. To say very little collateral damage, Israel is all about massacres, and this is true again and again. And there is just so much total lies and fabrications in the statement. I don't even know where to begin, except to say that Israel has been, and U.S. plans, Saudi and Turkish plans to dismember Syria have been seriously pushed back because both the Syrian people have mobilized, armed, and organized themselves, and there has been international solidarity and assistance that has enabled this country not to be ripped apart in another occupation. We've certainly seen what U.S. occupation has done in Iraq, completely dismembered, destroyed the country, hundreds of thousands of deaths. Israel is very much for the destruction of Syria, has always been for the dismemberment, and has continually made war on Syria all these many years of its existence. Its occupation of Golan is only one of the continuing crimes against Syria. Israel has never been interested in peace in Syria. Of course, they do want a Syrian surrender, but that is not peace. That is a total lack of sovereignty.
No.
They want business dealings, but one where only they have the upper hand. So this is really U.S. policy in the region to seek divide and conquer, to use sectarian violence, to use religious differences and escalate them. This is also Israel's policy in the region, and they have done it again and again. We've seen that policy in their wars in Lebanon. We've seen that policy and the way in which they act in the West Bank and in Gaza, and also internally within the 48 borders of Israel. So this is not a country that has ever been interested in peace. This is a country that exists in war and in occupation. And it has never been a force of anything except that division in the entire region. That's its purpose in the region, to be always a dividing line, a poison dart in the region. And that is a reason for U.S. aid to Israel all these years. It's a reason for also for Western NATO assistance to Israel all these years. They want to divide the wealth and the resources of the region, to pit one country against another, and to destroy the sovereignty of every country. And Israel works with that policy hand in glove. So this is really, no matter what way you put it, who's responsible for the war in Syria and for the thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths, a third of the population of Syria displaced. This is a result of war that has come from the outside, not on the Syrian people themselves, They have managed to organize themselves. They had quite an amazing accomplishment just a couple weeks ago with elections, where they were able to actually protect and defend 7,500 different polling places. I mean, that alone is quite an accomplishment in terms of providing, again and again, where are most of the displaced people in Syria? They are within the government zones because they're guaranteed food subsidies, education, health care.
Okay, I do sincerely apologize for interrupting you, Ms. Flounders.
Whereas
Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there at that point. But of course, we'll try to continue this conversation with both of you at a later date. Of course, we do appreciate both your contributions to this debate. That was the co-director of the International Action Center, Ms. Sarah Flounders, who was speaking to us live from New York. And we were also joined by the president of the Middle East Research Center, Mr. Richard Hellman, who had been speaking to us live from Washington. And of course, viewers, we appreciate you joining us as well. Until